Well, welcome to this 52nd edition of Palestine Deep Dive. And today, 2.5 million, 2.3 million Palestinians remain besieged in Gaza, and the region once again hovers over full-scale and a desperately unequal war. I'm joined by Rana and an old friend of the show, Dr Ramzy Baroud. Now, Rana joins us from Gaza City. She's a Palestinian author, mother, an English language trainer. Ramzy, of course, is a Palestinian journalist, media consultant, author, and founding editor of the Palestine Chronicle. And he joins us from Seattle. Now, as I mentioned, Rana is in Gaza City. We're delighted that she's been able to join us today on this, of all days. I believe, Rana's going to tell us in a minute what the current situation is, but we know there have been attacks on Gaza for a number of days now from Israel, and that these attacks have continued today. We understand that there appears to be some kind of ceasefire coming back in again under the aegis, essentially, of Egypt. But we're also reading, as we just came on air, that Prime Minister Netanyahu says this is not over. And so, thank you to you both. Thank you to Rana, because this is a particularly difficult time. And so we totally understand. I know it's quiet at the moment, you were saying, but if by any chance you have to leave us, we of course understand. But I wonder, given that you are actually there, and of course in our media, we don't often hear from ordinary Palestinians who are actually in Gaza or actually in the West Bank. So we're delighted that you are here with us. Perhaps you could just give us an idea, if you will, Rana, what you've been and what your family's been going through these past couple of days.
Yes, so thank you, Mark, and thank you for hosting me on this talk on your show. What happened, what started 2 days ago, was totally an unpredictable thing for everyone. It shocked everybody because we thought we were having a peaceful day and evening, and we were out with family. We came back home late night, we went to sleep, and then just suddenly, out of nowhere, we hear these huge explosions, and we woke up to them. And my kids came running into my room, telling me they've attacked, they've shelled an apartment in a building in our neighborhood. And it turned out that they were, at the same time as they did in 2008, they attacked 3 different places across Gaza Strip at the same time, killing 3 Islamic Jihad commanders, but also knowing that these places that they attacked are residential buildings and fully packed neighborhoods. So the number of casualties was not only among the PIG members, there were children, the wives of these members, and some of their children got killed, some of them left behind, and also ordinary citizens. My personal family dentist was killed, which was really devastating for me, and I'm still trying to really grapple with this fact that I'm not going to see him again. He was killed with his wife and one of his sons, and his other 3 children were left behind. It was very heartbreaking. And I thought, what makes Israel just decide, what gives it this, courage to just, attack civilian homes in the middle of the night at its will? And the answer is always the same. It's never been held accountable for its crimes. And, when you think about this, about homes just being attacked in the middle of the night, or like they did in August in broad daylight, there is no safety here in Gaza, not even at home.
Well, I was going to ask you, Rana, how are your daughters? And I think in fact, I know that we've spoken to you before, and we've seen video of your daughters in slightly happier times with some of their artwork. And maybe we can have a look shortly, revisit some of those videos. But how are they actually coping today? And how are the children coping?
So I didn't hear the last question. How they're coping?
Yeah, how are your daughters coping, and
Yeah.
how are other children that you've come across coping?
Well, when my children were younger, I mean, it was harder for me because they didn't, they grew up under every single major war that was waged against Gaza, and they had lots of questions. They had panic attacks. I dealt. I mean, I had a hard time dealing with them during those years when they were younger, and because you couldn't explain everything to them, they wouldn't understand. They just, wanted to be safe. And when they were younger, I tried to deal with this through, I guess, talking to them, taking them to making them, taking them out to do activities like to go horseback riding, to go swimming, to do just anything that would help them, release all this negative energy they had inside. And they did lots of drawing and painting, as I've said before in another video. And till this day, when they grow up now, they do what makes them relax. They understand everything that's going on, and sometimes they calm me down. So for other kids around, it's the same. I mean, the mothers, like yesterday, one of the kids that was killed, um, he's a friend of he's a friend of someone I know. So the mother was trying to explain to her son that his friend has been killed, and she didn't know how to approach this matter because he's only 9 years old. And she posted this on Instagram actually, and I think I sent it to Palestine Deep Dive for them to see that she told him, that uh, there's been an attack, and your friend is in heaven now, and all of that. And her child, and he was like, "Mom, I don't understand what you're saying. I'll only understand when I go back to school and see that he's not there." So, I mean, I imagine every mother in Gaza has her own suffering, her own traumatic experiences with her kids, and everybody just has to find a way to deal with them.
Well, Rana, of course, the Israeli government is saying that these attacks have been precision attacks, but as you were just saying, we know that there have been at least 10 or more civilians killed, including children. We know that 20 or so more people have been injured, and of course, we know from what's been happening that this is just part of an ongoing attack on Gaza. It has its ups and it has its downs. And actually, one I think hopefully we might be able to bring this up because children, of course, are going to be affected over quite a long period of time. And
Yeah.
I think your daughter has produced some very powerful images, um, which show that trauma. Actually, so that trauma comes out in the painting. I don't know if we're able to see that example. Yes, there we are. I mean, briefly, can you talk us through this painting by your daughter?
Yeah.
How old was she when she did it as well?
She just drew this today, actually,
Oh,
and
wow.
she's 17. So actually, most of the time, I have a hard time like deciphering her paintings, but this one I could see clearly because of the buildings, like this kangaroo's trying to protect Gaza, maybe, and and sometimes Gaza through the good and bad times, I guess. Gaza's under attack, but it's still it goes back to be to light. It keeps shining. So I think that's what she's trying to say in this painting. Yeah, and those buildings are Gaza, and you can see they have eyes and mouths. They're gaping at people.
Yes, I mean, I think it's very difficult for all of us watching, and there are people watching from all over the world, by the way, to really appreciate and understand what you are all experiencing and going through. Look, there they are again with beautiful sunflowers. Look, the thing is, I must just bring in before we come to you, Ramzy, some of the messages from viewers. Kiara says hello from the west of Ireland. Hashna, hello from Bangladesh. Una van der Heuvel, thank you for this webinar. Nice seeing you yesterday on the Zoom. Ben Shaw, evening from Yorkshire. Hello from Canada. Yes, what else? Yes, Palestine Deep Dive. That is us. We want to hear from you. So please post your questions here in the chat. Hello from Italy, says Heather. Chiara says, I read Ramzy Baroud's books, The Last Stand and Searching Janine, in the last few weeks. They're beautifully written, incredible interviews, but heartbreaking. Vicky says, I know young children are so traumatized even when no longer living in Gaza. So, Ramzy, if I can come to you, and you're joining us from Seattle, thank you for taking time out. As you know, this is all happening at the time that the world is commemorating the Nakba. You'll know that for the first time in 75 years, the United Nations is actually commemorating the Nakba. This is a result of a vote in the General Assembly back in 2012. On the 15th of May, the UN will be commemorating the Nakba. But in a way, what we're seeing now might suggest that looking back and commemorating might negate the idea that actually this is a continuing process. And I wonder if you might just briefly talk to that, Ramzy. You know, that we have the Nakba, but we are seeing in real time what is happening in Gaza, and not just in Gaza, but in the past few days also in the West Bank.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks very much to Rana and Palestine Deep Dive for their impressive contributions always to the discussion on Palestine. I think it's very important that we keep in mind that for Israel, wars are all about timing, all about strategy, all about politics. This nonsense that we hear in mainstream media, quoting Israeli officials and politicians and the likes of Netanyahu, Gallant, and others, that this is about security, it's preemptive attacks, self-defense. None of it is true, and it has everything to do with timing. Your point, Mark, regarding the Nakba, this is very, very important what the United Nations is doing. I know it is ultimately symbolic, and I know it's not going to bring one single Palestinian refugee back to his destroyed village or her destroyed town in Palestine. But the point here is that after all of these years of Israel doing its utmost to erase the Nakba memory, to erase not just the Nakba memory and all the crimes that Israel has committed in historic Palestine and upon which Israel was established, but it has also tried to erase it as an urgent political topic. It has pressed on the Palestinian negotiators throughout the years. You can't talk about the Nakba. In fact, soon before the so-called Camp David talks between Ehud Barak, Bill Clinton, and Yasser Arafat in 2000, in the year 2000, Israel passed a political decision forbidding a single Israeli politician of discussing the Nakba or the right of return for Palestinian refugees as part of the political process. After all of this, where Israel felt quite comfortable that that past history has been cancelled out entirely, we are talking about Oslo, we are talking about new history, new tragedies, new traumas. But we're not talking about 1948 anymore. Suddenly, the Nakba is once more at the heart of the conversation everywhere. Politically, intellectually, academically, on social media, it's all about the Nakba. And that is devastating for Israel. And this is why I bring up the issue of timing. I think Israel knew that there will be much discussions about the Nakba, hundreds of conferences all over the world, numerous interviews and rallies all over the world, from Britain to South Africa, all dedicated to the Nakba. And it wants to push that out of the news cycle. And it wants the conversation to be Israel's right to defend itself, as the US State Department said yesterday. I don't think they will succeed, because here you ask the question of what is happening in Gaza right now within the context of the Nakba. And I think everyone else who cares about the truth is going to contextualize the war on Gaza as we speak within that larger history of the Nakba that goes back 75 years ago.
I mean, Ramzy, it does become rather difficult for the Israelis, doesn't it, when there is that strategy, as you say, especially if Washington can take it up. Israel acting in self-defense, we've heard this so many times. But if people can, and as they have, listened to some of the members of this Israeli government and heard their promises and heard their desires about driving Palestinians out, it becomes really, really rather self-defeating, doesn't it? It can't work because really people have moved on, but world opinion seems to be moving on. And I suppose that could bring us to another question, which is, and we were just briefly discussing before we came on air. The Israelis were once famed for being the Israeli government was once quite famed for being pretty good in terms of its media tactics and presentation. But all of that seems to be failing now as well, doesn't it?
That's right. I mean, we know that Netanyahu, as a prime minister, is bankrupt, politically bankrupt, not only in the eyes of the international community, of the Middle East region, but even in the eyes of his own people. I mean, since January, massive protests that included millions of Israelis want him out. He is corrupt. His family is corrupt. And I'm not talking about the corruption by Israeli standards. I'm talking about corruption by any standards. Theft, money, nepotism, favoritism, fascism, everything. He's trying to control Israel in order for him to keep running his personal racket and keeps to benefiting along with his far-right constituency, which now includes Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich. We are talking about really, really nasty people here. But also Israel as a state is politically corrupt. And Israel as a state is intellectually corrupt. And this corruption and bankruptcy is not a new process. It's an old process. It's just we could not expose it because mainstream media has blocked us every step of the way. We couldn't get to the New York Times. We could hardly get our voice in the BBC. And these are the people and the media entities that control the conversation on Palestine. Average Americans, average British, until quite recently, took Israel's side simply because they did not understand. Not because they were Zionists and because they are Islamophobes and hateful of Palestinians, they simply did not understand. But how can you not understand now? When you have pictures like a little girl, Layan, today, 10 years old, and a little boy, Tamim, 5 years old, the most beautiful Palestinian children that you will ever see are on social media with their videos dressed up for their for the Eid, speaking to us. Layan was telling us today this is the proper way of saying peace be upon you in Islam, and she is teaching little kids on how to say peace be upon you. Where is the peace in Layan's life? She is gone now. Where is the peace in Tamim's life and the lives of all those Palestinians, the 22 and counting, who have been killed since yesterday? We've seen them, we've heard them. How can Israeli propaganda, how can Zionist propaganda, how can the Ministry of Truth and Hasbara in Tel Aviv be strong enough to muffle the voices of Layan? They are all over social media. Millions of people have heard her speak. And this is why Israel is becoming bankrupt intellectually, morally, and it's exposed because of the power of the Palestinian voice, even of little children after they die.
Rana, I mean, listening to Ramzy there and looking at those pictures and hearing also from you of your experiences of what you've seen. I mean, do you feel a bit more hopeful because more people in the world are more aware? I mean, before you answer, I mean, I would simply say that what Ramzy was saying in terms of the reach of social media, how traditional media that was not interested or blocked or whatever it was doing, essentially has been bypassed and has to react now. And also we do have a greater understanding in countries like Britain, beginning of the history and the history of this country in particular, and why this country has a special responsibility. So people have got a greater understanding of that. But is that any I mean, how does that sit with you? Does that make you feel a bit more confident that what you're going through, what you're
Yes.
experiencing, may yet come to an end one of these days?
Well, yes, I think I have always had faith in people, in grassroots movements, and I mean, I've been watching what the protests in Britain against Elbit Systems, calling for the shutdown of these factories that manufacture weapons, which are tested on us here in Gaza, because you know Gaza is a testing field for the Israelis, for these weapon companies. And I mean, when I see these protests, even if they're small, but when I see consistency, you know, in these protests and people uplifting our voices and people talking about us, um, speaking about the Palestinian narrative and communicating our stories, trying to, you know, uh, get interviews, for example, on any media outlets. I know that we're blocked on mainstream media, but doing what they can, even if they're just small steps, I think it gives us all hope and it makes us feel that we're valued, that we are heard, despite you know what is happening to us. And you know, this is the way it is. I mean, injustice is not going to go in a day. It takes decades. Change takes time. So we have hope in people like you, just ordinary people who feel that they that connect with us as humans, and they want and they refuse this injustice and this oppression that is that's up on the Palestinian people. But what really sometimes, I guess, at difficult times like these, we're going through now, sometimes we tend to get hopeless uh, because you know, Israel keeps attacking at its will, and we're always asking, why do they get away with it? Why can't they just do what they want? I was just looking at Twitter a few minutes ago, and someone on Twitter wrote that 2 million, as they are about to announce, hopefully, inshallah, a ceasefire. 2 million Gazans will now go back to being forgotten, caged in a permanent state of non life and expected to keep quiet about it. 21 Palestinians killed to satisfy the Israelis' far right and boost government approval ratings. So we don't want this solidarity only in times of hardship. We want consistency and people to keep, you know, keep up what they're doing, keep uplifting our voices, keep talking, and keep making noise. And also for us here as activists, people, writers, anyone, we have to keep, you know, speaking up about what we're going through.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you, Ron, and also you were referring to that direct action, and towards this company Elbit in Leicestershire, and I think today the one of the Leicester City members of Parliament, Claudia Webb, spoken out very, very strongly in support of that action, and so hearing more solidarity such as that from public representatives is a good thing, but of course, as you know. Just as we have been seeing, both of you will appreciate this, I'm sure, and I'll come to you both for comments, but to you first, Rana, in terms of what we see in social media and alternative media, reporting what's happening in Gaza, reporting what's been happening in Nablus and Jericho, we have also seen a sort of, especially in a country like Britain, also Germany, a kind of retreat from the public debate realm by politicians, too frightened until quite recently to be speaking out in favor and support of the Palestinians, in case they might be accused of being anti-Semitic. Now, we've had this discussion before with Ramzy, but we've also just seen one or two other interesting developments. The famous international rock star musician Roger Waters won his case to have his concert in Frankfurt. A quite extraordinary attempt by Frankfurt Council to stop it from going ahead, but we are seeing more and more pushback. So do you think, Rana, that this is, you know, the reality of what we're seeing is once again emboldening people? Because for some time now, a lot of voices have been stilled because they've been frightened of being accused of being anti-Semitic if they're critical of the Israeli government. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think activating BDS on all levels is very important. And what you mentioned, the cultural aspect of BDS, whether in culture, in sports, in the act, in filming, in singing, all of these fields of all these fields, people can take action and speak up against the oppression, and I think especially sometimes it comes after these people realize that like Israel is an apartheid regime, because this was reinforced by the report issued by Human Rights Watch a few months ago, identifying Israel as an apartheid regime. So when people make these realize these facts and they follow up on our stories, on these reports, it makes them take action. And I think that for the MPs, maybe I guess they have to make their own calculations, as we say in Arabic, because they might lose their job forever. Although they are in a place where they, they have to make change, or they are in a position to make change. But yeah, when I see these people, these rock stars, athletes pulling out from matches because there's an Israeli opponent, for example, it's still, even if it's small, like I said, I think it makes us, it gives us hope, yes. And it's going to be small at the beginning, but the million-mile journey starts with a step, as they say.
Ramzy, what's your take on that? Oh, we can't hear you.
So your father. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you're
Can
back.
you hear me now?
Yes, you're with us, Ramzy. Yeah.
If you look at history of resistance movements, for example, South Africa and the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, you would realize that Palestinians don't really need to reinvent the wheel. The wheel is there and we know how it works. Resistance at home and solidarity abroad. There is no other interpretation. I would love to have a third take or a different theory of how people get liberated. But it has to start with resistance at home, and Palestinians are resisting. And it's only the Palestinians who determine the time, place, and nature of their resistance. The resistance of Sheikh Khidr Adnan, who died in a hunger strike after 87 days of hunger strike, is linked to the resistance that we see in Gaza, linked to the resistance in Sheikh Jarrah, linked to the resistance in Nasra, Haifa, and Yafa. It's all part of the same kind of resistance. The nature of the resistance is determined, however, by the circumstances on the ground, and only Palestinians can make their own mind and their own strategy of how to resist. Or, by the way, some of the people killed today, they were killed from the socialist movement. They were socialist fighters, which comes to show you that this is not an Islamic resistance, not secular resistance, it's just Palestinian resistance in all of its manifestations. But solidarity outside, it is absolutely critical. I am not going to cry over mainstream media betrayal of Palestine. Well, guess what? Mainstream media has betrayed Nelson Mandela and his comrades. Mainstream media has always betrayed national liberation movements, because mainstream corporate media are, by definition, they stand on the side of the powerful, the aggressor, and so forth and so on. That's not going to change. So for us to spend an iota of our energy trying to get mainstream media to be slightly kinder and fairer to Palestinians is a complete waste of time. What you are doing with Palestine Deep Dive, what others are doing, the numerous alternative online, digital, social media activism, is achieving that incremental difference in favor of Palestine, and every day is better than the day before. People like Roger Waters taking these moral stances, despite of the risks that these stances entail, standing for it, not wavering, not backing down, and pushing. And there are many Roger Waters out there. It wakes people up all over the world that it is possible to fight back. And no matter what the price is, with our unity, we will eventually be able to get to where we want, and that is the freedom of the Palestinian people. Ilan Pape often speak about the incremental genocide of the Palestinians. Let's talk about the incremental solidarity with the Palestinians. And let's every single day, anywhere in the world, be a day in which we achieve that incremental resistance in order for us to finally end Israeli apartheid, dismantle Israeli apartheid, end the Israeli occupation, destroy this racist Zionist regime at work in Palestine. We have said this before in the past. Never again. Never again. Yet somehow it's always again and again and again against Palestinians in Gaza and throughout Palestine. We'll say, guess what? Never again against any innocent people anywhere in Palestine or anywhere else in the world.
Ramzy, the incremental solidarity you were talking about is a very powerful thing, many people would say, because even for those, and there are very many people right across the world who are not, whose lives are caught up with other things, they don't necessarily follow the news even on the mainstream media. But most decent people who have got a vague understanding know what is happening to the Palestinians is wrong. They say so. But what gives it a much more powerful credence is that they also hear, because they're very, very sympathetic to the plight of the Ukrainians whose land has been occupied. And this leads me to the question. There's a question, this is coming from Jamal. He's actually in Leicester, where this action is taking place against Urbit, the military hardware company. Now, Jamal asked this question: shouldn't we be outraged at how callously the Western media normalizes the killing of Palestinian men and those involved in armed resistance? Can't we mourn the death of a Palestinian man or woman? Why should we mourn the death of a Ukrainian resistance, but not at least offer some nuance when it comes to Palestinian men and women involved in defending their people? And I suppose the question is, if you're resisting occupation, whether it's in Ukraine or Palestine, there should be no difference. There should surely be consistency, shouldn't there? Ramzy, what would you say to that?
Absolutely. I mean, this has been, I've suggested this before, that I think the word hypocrisy doesn't even begin to describe what is happening right now, where the entire Western thinking and political discourse on war, on resistance, on peace, on justice, on solidarity, on anything and everything has shifted within hours when Russia invaded parts of Ukraine in February. But we have been fighting for 75 years to get the so-called Western world and so-called US-led international community to recognize the inherent Palestinian right in merely defending themselves. And we can't still achieve that. There is no space within the morality of the Western world to accommodate that a Palestinian, maybe under certain circumstances, could in fact stand with a gun and fire at an Israeli warplane that is bombing his house in Khan Yunis or in Rafah or in Jabalia. We still cannot get the international community to acknowledge that. And if a Palestinian does defend himself, regardless of the circumstances, is a terrorist. Not a terrorist between parentheses, not some kind of no, is just a terrorist. But a Ukrainian can do whatever it takes to fight back the Russians. And yet somehow we are all applauding. We are all singing the praises of Ukraine in unison. And we are all waiting for Putin to be brought to the International Criminal Court. Well, when the Palestinians try to get the Israeli criminals to be held accountable before the ICC, Washington actually imposed sanctions. I repeat that they imposed sanctions on ICC judges, saying that how dare you.
Ramzy, as you know, this is the same Washington that's not even a member of the International Criminal Court. I mean,
which is not even a member. So whom did they use? Whom did they use in order for them to do that? What they call friends of the court. Germany. They got the Germans to fight the Palestinians at every corner of the ICC so that they wouldn't even open a case against Israeli war crimes. And yet somehow these very countries that are not even members of the ICC managed to get an arrest warrant against Putin. This is why I'm saying hypocrisy is not even the word. There is something absolutely beyond outrageous behind all of this.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, Rana, I'll come to you in a minute. There are a few messages coming through. I don't know who this is from, but this person I think he's calling himself the Unknown. All my love and solidarity for you, full support for your struggle and BDS from this proud Jew who grew up under apartheid and is now living in Berlin. David Johnson says, so right, Ramzy. The question, Rana, and this is from Emma in Manchester, because we're talking about the Nakba in addition to what is continuing to happen, the continuing Nakba, the ongoing Nakba against the Palestinians 75 years on. We've talked about ethnic cleansing. We know that ethnic cleansing has taken place from that period onwards and is continuing. But Emma in Manchester asks, what language should commentators and journalists be using now? Are we looking at a genocide, as many Palestinians are saying? Are we now looking at a genocide? Or has there always been a genocide taking place?
Yes, well, I think that the Nakba is not an event that we just commemorate about something that happened 75 years ago. No, the Nakba has been ongoing ever since 1948. And when you look at it, it's the incremental genocide has never stopped. The destruction, the displacements have never stopped. The apartheid in the West Bank and is very clear. You can see it. It's where the West Bank has been turned into like like as my friend I was telling you about said, there are many Gazas. They're just, they're isolated areas in the West Bank. The cities, they're all controlled on the outside by the Israelis. So the apartheid is clear. There's an apartheid wall. The land theft, the burning of trees, the humiliation and dehumanization of human beings every single day as they go to work. I mean, my friend was telling me about the infamous military checkpoints in the West Bank, and some of them, how like you would find like hundreds of people crammed into these, trying to get through these military checkpoints and being dehumanized, treated like animals, and they all have to pass through in an hour. And they do this every single day, back and forth. So and when you look at Gaza, Gaza has had also its share of Nakbas and displacements. I mean, all the Israeli aggressions which have been launched against Gaza have displaced people all over. Some of them refugees, some of them not. I know people whose houses have been demolished over and over with every single attack. And people have, people, they lost their homes. They sought refuge in UNRWA schools, at relatives' homes. They lost their businesses. And even when they sought refuge in the UNRWA schools, they attacked. In 2008, they attacked one of the schools and killed the people who were seeking shelter there. So the Nakba is still present in every way, in every aspect of our lives, whether here in Gaza, whether in West Bank, or even in occupied Palestine, where the Palestinians in 1948 lands are not treated as second or third class citizens. They don't have the same rights as the Israeli citizens, and they're also, we hear these almost daily incidents of shooting against the Palestinians there. The last of which was a couple of days ago when a settler shot a young 19-year-old Palestinian. They just got out of his car and shot him at point blank range, and he killed him. So, but I guess with time, the Israelis have invented new ways of perpetuating this Nakba for the Palestinian people. It has never stopped.
Well, certainly they seem to develop new weaponry and new ways of making lives miserable and taking lives, using the kind of weaponry against citizens and civilians, which is absolutely illegal under international law. Another few comments coming in here. It'd be quite useful if you're able to, before we leave, both of you, to suggest some books for people, or articles or magazines for people who want to know more about Palestinian history, be a great help for the seeker of knowledge. As you probably know, Ramzy, Rana, there's a big event. You were talking about events around the world. There's a big event here in London on Friday, a couple of days from now, in the Methodist Central Hall to commemorate the Nakba. And that has a particular resonance because that building was where the first meeting of the United Nations General Assembly took place in 1946. And of course, literally a year or two later, Britain abandoned Palestine under declaring its mandate was over, having not actually upheld the mandate in terms of looking after the interests of those it was supposed to do. And so I suppose the question is, given where we are, given that we are seeing a special trade deal currently being negotiated between Britain and Israel, given that we've seen British ministers with their Israeli counterparts, despite the fact that this is the most extremist government that there's ever been in Israel. Ramzy, what does it take to get people, the British establishment, the British government, to face up finally to their responsibilities? They did finally over South Africa, but that took one hell of a lot of effort. But what is it going to take for it to happen here in Britain?
Well, exactly, Mark. That point that it took a lot of efforts in order for us to change the dynamics and the type of relationship. Let's remember that Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were the last of world leaders to actually acknowledge that the apartheid government in South Africa is a racist government, and to finally sever their ties. So the question is, what are these efforts, and how can we duplicate or at least learn from the previous experiences? What kind of grassroots work that would have to be done, this foundational work that would allow us to expose Israel and its benefactors as well? I know in the United States, I know in Britain, of course, a lot's been going on for a long time, and there are numerous activists and organizations that are working towards that but also in the US, we're talking about changes within the very fundamental political structure of American society, to the point that majority Democrats are actually anti-Israel. This would have been considered unthinkable in the past. So now that we are getting the rank and file to our side, we know that the political institution, the power hubs of the Democratic Party is still very much a Zionist. Biden himself has repeatedly admitted, proudly in fact, that he is a Zionist and he's proud, and he said, you don't need to be Jewish to be a Zionist. I'm not a Jewish and I'm a Zionist. No, so the question is, how do we turn that support at the foundational grassroots level to actual political assets and to change the politics on the top? And again, we go back here to the idea of exposing, holding accountable, getting the numbers on our side. The moment that the numbers become on our side, it will become a lot more difficult for those on top to sustain their attitude towards Israel. We know that, for example, just only recently, the EU has canceled an event in Israel because the racist fascist Itamar Ben-Gvir was going to attend. Maybe this would have not happened 20 years ago. For sure, it would have not happened 30 years ago, but it happened now. So we are beginning to see some changes. They are not moral changes, mind you. They are political changes that are motivated by the fight at the very bottom, the grassroots fight that is happening in every society in the West and beyond.
Indeed, Ramzy. And as you were saying that, I was actually also thinking about the European Parliament, where the EU's chief, Ursula von der Leyen, the senior commissioner, who has been very vocal in her support of Israel and who's been to Israel, as we know, in the past year, and singularly fails to mention the plight of the Palestinians or even international law, has come under quite severe attack by some parliamentarians. And this has been, I would argue, just watching it, very, very effective. And also, we haven't really seen anything quite like that in a very, very long time at the European Parliament. Members of the European Parliament standing up and saying, This is hypocrisy. This is nonsense. Why were you in Israel? Why did you not mention and raise the issue of the Palestinians? So yes, absolutely. What you're saying, what you're both saying, is that we are seeing a much greater degree of clarity, it seems, objectivity, it seems, in some quarters, and also a desire by many people to attack this complete lack of consistency and the hypocrisy. So, look, Erica Lang says, we must never forget we lost the chance of the most progressive prime minister, this is in the UK, ever, over the establishment's protection of Israel and its foreign policy interests. I think that Erica, is referring to Mr. Jeremy Corbyn. I'm encouraged to hear that what we're doing with alternative media channels is building incremental support, and hope more and more are waking up. Yes, what do we have here? Some recommendations of books for people to read. Another book by Ramzy Baroud here. Rashid Khalidi's 100 Years War on Palestine, of course. Books by Ramzy Baroud. You might also suggest The Iron Wall by Avi Schleim as a very good book. It's still relevant. Now a question. We've got another 10 minutes, if that's all right with both of you. And thank you, Rana, for, I know it's very difficult. You don't know what the situation is outside your own apartment. Rana is in Gaza, as we mentioned earlier. Ramzy's in Seattle. Rana, Sarona in South London asks, what do you wish people in the diaspora, Palestinians especially, what should they do? Should they be organizing bodies to lead from the front in their struggle for liberation? Wouldn't this be more effective leadership than that being, well, we haven't really mentioned the Palestinian Authority, but perhaps that's because we haven't really been noticing them.
Yes.
You say that Palestinians are much better bypassing this authority, not least because they don't seem to be able to have any say over it.
Yeah, I mean, every attack that happens, we hardly hear their voice or their condemnation. And look at how many attacks Gaza has been under, and the Palestinian president has never come to visit us. While if so-called terrorist attacks happen outside, he just travels to other countries to give his condolences. And when Israeli soldier gets killed, he calls up and gives his condolences as well. So they're not really on our radar. We're not really thinking about them so much. And I think Gaza has learned that it has to stand up for itself. That I mean, we don't really depend. I mean, because Dr. Ramzy mentioned the double standards of the Western world and of the ICC, of the UN, of every international body out there. I mean, that really has never. I mean, they just issue decisions, and they cannot make the Israelis, implement these decisions. So Gaza has learned to stand up for itself, and I think that's the reason why after every attack that Israel initiates, the mediators rush quickly to call in for a truce, because they don't want the Israelis to get hurt, and because that's the only language that they understand. I mean, there is no political representation for us, or the authority has not benefited our cause in any way. And so although we're all alone here on the ground, we have to fight the struggle ourselves. Resistance is something that is part of our rights as a people under occupation. And speaking of deterrence, Israel announced that it carried out this so-called Operation Shield and Arrow in order to restore its power of deterrence. And I don't think it has achieved in that regard. So I'm sorry, I think I just diverted I forgot the question.
Right. I mean, but do you think that it might be possible for a kind of alternative leadership to emerge in exile? I mean, this has happened before, and it's happened with other countries too. If it's impossible to have of course you have a resistance in the Palestinian territories, but a political resistance outside the country that could be more emboldened, that isn't kind of hollowed out or corrupted, as some people believe. Could this come about, do you think?
I don't really know how
We're
to
looking at
answer
some
this
of the
question.
figures.
I mean, I don't know how to answer this question. I mean, it's hard to imagine that I mean, how would the Palestinians be able to, form a new leadership outside? I really can't answer this question. I would maybe pass it to
Well, maybe
Dr.
I could ask Ramzy, because these things can't just be arrived at. But I mean, we know from the past that Palestinian leadership has at different times been quite remarkable in terms of some of the great literary figures, the campaigning figures, and in the case of Yasser Arafat. Where is the contemporary Yasser Arafat, if you like? Where is today's
I think we have, I think, Mark, this is a great question, by the way. I think we have a great leadership. And I disagree with those notions that Palestinians, and it's been even uttered by very well-respected Palestinian intellectuals. We have been cursed. Historically, we have been cursed by bad leadership. It's not true. We actually have great leadership. Our leadership is constantly assassinated. Our leadership is in prison. We have 5,000 people in prison right now. Many of them are more than qualified to be the leaders of this new generation in Palestine. So, but the leadership that is allowed and permitted to supposedly represent us and speak on our behalf is extremely corrupt leadership that survives on American and Western handouts. So the issue is not the crisis of leadership per se. The issue is that the leadership is not allowed to formulate itself as a leadership. Now that takes us back to the first Intifada, 1987. In 1987, the Palestinian people took the leadership away from those who imposed themselves as the sole and representative leaders of the Palestinian people. So we start seeing people like Haidar Abdul Shafi and people like Saeb Ariqat, people like Hanan Ashrawi and others, this kind of grassroots, well-educated Palestinian leadership emerging from Gaza, the West Bank and elsewhere, and forming its own kind of formulating its own political discourse and speaking in tandem with the grassroots resistance that was happening in Palestine at the time. Now I think the same thing is happening once more. We are beginning to see a unified Palestinian resistance, not just in Gaza, as today particularly has proven, but in the West Bank as well. The Lions Den in particular, they are all members of various factions, but they do not speak on behalf of any factions. So we are beginning to see non-factional Palestinian resistance formulating in Palestine. And I think as a result, you are also beginning to see Palestinian leaders emerging in Palestine. You don't know of them. I don't know of them because they are operating at a town level, a neighborhood level, a city level. They are the ones running the show in Sheikh Jarrah. They are the ones in Nablus, but they are yet to be formulated as one single centralized leadership. And I think because the time is not quite right yet, I'm not against people, against the Palestinian leadership in exile, but I'm against any kind of leadership that imposes itself in a way that is not organic on the Palestinian people, no matter how well-intentioned they may be.
And Ramzy, leading on from that, to concentrate the minds of people, especially in countries like the United States and Britain and Germany and other countries in Europe, what do you think these politicians can and have to do now in terms of taking out proper sanctions against the Israelis? What must they do? What swift actions can they take?
Right. So my message here is not to the politician. Again, there are really good people out there and there are well-intentioned people. But my message is to the constituencies of these politicians. We have seen recently the cities of Barcelona, the cities of Liège in Belgium, even Oslo, which is ironic, boycotting Israel at a city council level. This is dramatic shift. Just when you start thinking, well, is BDS working or not working, you have these three very important cities launching a new type of sanctions on Israel. This did not happen because of the politicians per se, even though I know that the heads of these councils are very good people and they are trying to do the right thing, but because of the concentrated efforts of their constituencies. So my message to anybody, Germany, France, Belgium, Spain, Britain, anywhere else, organize at a local level and try to achieve, try to get your mobilization of your constituency to actually achieve political ends. The moment you start doing so, we will be able to eventually, with time, reach massive changes or major changes at a centralized political level, as we have seen in some Scandinavian countries. We have seen that in Ireland, and hopefully we are going to be seeing this soon in Spain and other places.
Well, there's a message for all of you out there who are watching, and especially in Britain. If you've got a city mayor or a council which likes to call itself progressive, get them to take this action that Ramzy's called for. Get them to do it. No excuses. Look, sadly, we have to bring things to a close, but I'm just going to go to some of you because we've had some fantastic messages coming in. Lots of people very, very pleased that we've had this discussion. Also saying how brave you are, Rana, and wishing you and your family all the best, and also for the community around you. We hope that this horror ends, and as soon as is possible. There's a message here. I don't know who this is from, but appreciation from the Netherlands. Thank you, Rana Shaber and Dr. Ramzy Baroud. We stand by you, sending love and courage from Berlin, and that's from Adam Broomberg. Haidar Abd al-Shafi was brilliant. I'm not sure what that is in relation with. Look, we have got, oh, by the way, currently trending on Twitter in UK, Gaza, 184,000 tweets. So there is social media in action for you. Okay, well, look, Maz says thank you so much to all of you. I think we may have lost Rana, but we thank her, and we thank you, Ramzy. Thank all behind the scenes here at Palestine Deep Dive, to Omar and to Alex, and for all of you from right across the world who have joined us today. Please continue to do what you are doing and do more, and follow Ramzy's advice. Get lobbying, get campaigning, get pushing, and let's make a difference. Thank you. Until next time.